So where I got cut off was with Thurman and the intelligence test. So we're on part 2 of intelligence by David Myers, Psychology, 8th edition AP Psychology textbook. So Thurman is going to take Binet's intelligence test, and he's going to make the modern day IQ test. And so what the IQ test does is it goes ahead and it takes your mental age over your chronological age, times it by 100, and that's how you get your IQ. So mental age is like if you're 16 but yet you're performing at a college level, at let's say a 20-year-old's college level, then what you're going to do is you're going to take your mental age of 20 and you're going to take your chronological age of 16 and you're going to divide 20 by 16, and then you're going to times it by 100, and your IQ would be 125, which is pretty good. Anything over 100 is considered pretty good because 100 is the average IQ. And so when you look at IQs, it goes with a standard deviation of 15. So IQ at 100 is average, 115 is the next standard deviation, and then the next one is 130. And anything over 130 is what we would consider a genius or a high intelligence IQ. So when we look at aptitude and achievement tests, aptitude tests predict how well you're going to do in the future. So the SAT is an aptitude test. Achievement tests are supposed to reflect on what you've already learned. So the ACT is an achievement test. It's testing you based on what you've learned in school up to that point. So the WAIS test, this is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and what this test does is it's supposed to test you to see where you are. And they also have one for children. So it measures your overall intelligence, and there's 11 other aspects that relate to intelligence that are designed to assess like clinical and educational problems. So clinical would be like abnormal things, and then education problems are also abnormal, but like ADHD, it could be like depression, things like that. So principles of test construction. For a test to actually be accessible, or for people to keep taking it, for it to be something that we would want our students to continue using in the next couple of years, for it to be something that is standard, reliable, and valid. And so tests like the SAT, the ACT, the end of course test, these have all stand the test of time. They've been standard, they're reliable, and they're valid. Now we look at standardization. Standardization is a test that involves administering the test to a representative sample of future test takers in order to establish a basis for meaningful comparison. So standardizing a test. The first year that normally you guys get a test is a trial year. We're trying to figure out what the standard passing rate should be on that test. And for standardization, a test needs to be given in the same kind of environment, the same way. So that's why you always have to read the same instructions on those EOCs, you know, or any of the tests. You always have to read the same instructions. Everybody has to be tested in the same kind of environment. It's the same thing for the SAT and the ACT. When we look at a actual test, we look normally at a normal curve being on a test, or the bell curve. And so a standardized test establishes a normal distribution of scores on a test population in a bell-shaped pattern. So what it looks at is like here, I told you the average, this is IQs. So when I looked at the average IQ, it is about 100, okay? And you can see the standard deviation is 15, keeps going down. Anything below a 70 is for our abnormal, our learning disabled population. Anything over 130 is considered really good. We're talking Bill Gates here. So you can see this, the 70 and below and the 130 and below make up 2% of the population each. So what you're looking at here and here, it should be about the same. And then you just go up and have somewhere fall in the middle your actual bell curve. So the Flynn effect is each generation is supposed to be getting smarter than the previous generation because IQ scores are on the increase. And some reasons for the Flynn effect can be like the fact that your generation has access to 24-hour information. You have the internet, you have 24-hour news stations, you have TV, you have everything possibly at your disposal. And so one day your kids will actually be smarter than you guys are. Reliability. A test needs to be reliable, and if a test is reliable, it should produce consistent results. So what it should tell you is if a kid is getting an A in a class, they should probably be getting an A on the actual exam. Now, if a kid's got an F in the class and then they get an A on the exam, you need to look at how reliable the test is. But it should be consistent. Like every year, kids should do about the same on those tests. So here's how we look at reliability. So split half reliability. You divide the test into 2 equal halves and assess how consistent the scores are. You can also do reliability using different tests. So I have test A and test B and see how consistent the test scores are. Test, retest reliability. So using the same test on 2 occasions to measure the actual consistency of it. Validity. Reliability of a test does not ensure validity. Validity of a test refers to what the test is supposed to measure or predict. So if I tell you tomorrow you're going to have a test on chapter 15 and then I give you a test on chapter 8, it wouldn't be a valid test because that's not what I told you I was going to measure on the test. I told you I was going to measure chapter 15, so you studied chapter 15 and then you come in and I measured chapter 8 or chapter 9. It wouldn't be a valid test. So content validity refers to the extent a test measures a particular behavior or trait. And then predictive validity refers to the function of a test in predicting a particular behavior or trait. Content validity would be like an end of course exam, a final exam. Predictive validity is like the SAT. Over the years, the SAT has proven to be a predictive test that is valid because when they look at the SAT scores and they look at how well these freshmen do their first year, it actually kind of measures out. So the dynamics of intelligence. Does intelligence remain stable over a lifetime or does it change? Are individuals on the 2 extremes of the intelligence scale really that different? So we're going to look at it. When we look at stability or change, intelligence scores seem to become stable about 7 years of age. So when we look at all these studies, most kids about 7 years of age, it remains pretty stable. So extremes of intelligence, we have these 2 test scores. So anyone below 70 and below is considered our mental retardation population. Anything 130 or above is considered our high intelligence. So when we look at our special needs population, you need to know mild, moderate, severe, and profound. So mild is 50 to 70 on our IQ. And most of these kids will learn up to about a 6th grade intelligence. They can read, they can write, they can do these things, they can have a job. The closer they are to 70, the more like reliant they're going to be on themselves. They'll be able to live like on their own. If they're like in the 60s, they're going to need assistance. Moderate is 35 to 50, and when you look at a moderate child, this is where like Down syndrome, the typical IQ of a Down syndrome child is a 50. And this is about 10% of our actual population, and they normally get to about a 2nd grade education. So they can do reading, they can write, they can do math problems, they can do all this stuff. And their school is normally geared at getting them life skills. Severe is 20 to 35 on our IQ. You're only looking at about 3 to 4% of the population. These children can learn to talk and they can perform simple tasks, but they really need to learn like how to take care of themselves. They really don't have. You can give them vocational training, and it's not to say that they don't, but psychologists say that they're not really gaining a whole lot. Whereas a child like in the moderate, you can give them like a vocational education, some sort of training, and they can do certain job skills. Profound is below 20, and this is 1 to 2% of the population. And when you look at 1 to 2% of the population for profound, most of these children are bedridden, and they become adults like this, and they don't really get out of bed. They don't really talk, and they kind of just lay in bed, and they have a lot of health problems because of those things. As you look at this population, you're seeing the mild as the larger population. So high intelligence, contrary to the popular belief, kids and adults who have high intelligence are typically well-adjusted, well-rounded people. They actually adapt very well to society, and they seem to function and blossom. So genetics and environmental influence on intelligence. So we look at this nature-nurture thing again. So is intelligence due to genetics or environment? Okay. When you look at genetic influences, studies of twins, family members, and adopted children together support the idea that there is a significant genetic contribution to your intelligence. So if mom and dad are intelligent, it's a pretty good factor that you're probably going to be intelligent too. Now, if mom and dad struggled with school and their IQ is not 100, then that also is going to be a pretty strong indicator of what's going to happen for you in school. It's just the way it goes. So adoption studies, and when we talked about this when we looked at Chapter 3, Nature and Nurture, adopted children show a marginal correlation in verbal ability to their adopted parents. So that means they're more like their biological parent than they are their adopted parent. So environmental influences, fraternal twins, that's the brother-sister ones, they're raised together, tend to show similarities in intelligence scores. So whether you like your brother or sister or not, you're probably about the same, whereas intelligence scores go, you're probably similar. And identical twins raised apart show slightly less similarity in their intelligence scores. So our identical twins seem to be about the same no matter what the environment is. So early intervention effects. So if a child is neglected at a very early age, we do see a child actually decreasing with their intelligence as time goes on. And it's not like their IQ is going down, it's just that they're not going to gain what they need to. So children who don't get fed, children who are kind of left alone, like in these orphanages, these are children who are going to have an impoverished environment, and therefore their intelligence is going to suffer over time. So environment matters. And so does genetics. So schooling is an experience that pays dividends, and it's reflected in our intelligence scores. So increased schooling correlates with higher intelligence scores. And we know this is why we do like the Head Start program or the More at 4 here in North Carolina. So we have children go to school earlier so that they'll have a better footing, a better foundation for later on. So we look at group differences in intelligence. So why do groups differ in intelligence, and can we make sense of these differences? So ethnic similarities. Racial groups differ in their average intelligence score. Now, main reason why racial groups do differ in their average intelligence scores is because of discrimination that occurred a long time ago and still occurs today, okay? So then high-scoring people in groups are more likely to obtain high levels of education and income. And with money comes a lot of great things, like you can get your kids on a better school system, or you can get your kids, to go to a field trip that's going to enrich their life. But if you are making it month to month, you don't have $500 or $600 to send your kid on a field trip to Washington, D.C. So your kid's not going to get to go, whereas the wealthier kid who normally has that opportunity anyway, they're going to be able to go to the $600 field trip. So there's reasons why there are differences in the intelligence or the IQ scores. So when we look at African Americans and we look at white Americans, okay, so white Americans' average IQ is 100. The average IQ for a black American is 85. Now, why is this? Is because of those discrimination laws. If you put someone who wasn't able to complete school, like a great-grandmother or a grandmother who, because of the before the 1960s civil rights movement, they weren't allowed to complete their education, you put them in with modern-day black Americans, there's going to be a difference in what maybe great-grandma knows versus what her kids know. And it would be the same thing for a lot of the white Americans who are poor. But white Americans seem to have a higher intelligence, but it's because there hasn't been that many discrimination laws against them, whereas there was for black Americans. We see the same thing like in New Zealand, and we see the same thing in New Zealand where there was discriminatory laws against the indigenous group of people that had lived there, so the Aborigines. So environmental effects. Differences in intelligence among these groups are largely environmental, as if one environment is more fertile in developing these abilities than others. So you guys remember Brown versus Board of Education. The African American schools in America were given like all the hand-me-downs, the secondhand stuff. And because they were given all the secondhand stuff, those children in those environments, they weren't flourishing, because they had like 15, 20-year-old textbooks. And so the information was outdated, or the textbooks were falling apart as soon as they touched them. So there was a huge environmental problem there. So, reason why environment affects intelligence. Races are remarkably alike. Race is a social category that we came up with. Asian students outperform North American students on math achievement and aptitude tests, and it's typically because of the environment, because of the pressure. Today's better prepared populations would outperform populations in the 1930s. White and black infants tend to score equally well on tests predicting future intelligence. Different ethnic groups have experienced periods of remarkable achievement in different eras. So here's just 7 ways that we look at males and females differing.